welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today, as always, on a Thursday, I'm joined by Stevie Mullen. Welcome back, Stevie.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Delighted to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you, Stevie. There's been loads happening over the last week since you were last in. You were our resident European pundit for a couple of weeks there. We scraped through, we got through it, and now we can talk about the upcoming game. And there's a few issues with regards to things we didn't think were going to be issues. So talk to us about the last week in the world of Celtic. What do you want to bring up? What do you want to highlight?
Show. And Jimmy Curry. And the last time I went up to visit Jimmy in the Marie Curie before he sadly passed away, on his deathbed, all he spoke about was young Declan, and how much he'd helped him during his illness. So I know Declan would be delighted to know that Jimmy thought so highly of him, and I think he would have done anything to promote Declan. So Jimmy will be in heaven looking down on Declan, really, really happy. So that's the first bit. The other bit is Aaron and Siobhan Connolly, who start donate a Time to Tackle, the mental health organisation. They've confirmed that they're going to be expecting twins. Now, Aaron's been brave enough to come out and talk about some of his darkest days.
Yeah.
And Thomas Fuller, the theologian in history, in 1650 made a statement: darkness is always, the darkest is just the hour before the dawn. So hopefully Aaron and Siobhan have heard that, and now they're coming into the light of the dawn, the expecting to the twins. So congratulations to them. And to my own young nephew Andy McLaughlin, who's probably better known as Pingu, who started a walk and talk mental health group. They're now doing weekly sessions, and there's boxing training, PE training, and Andrew's had some real personal issues which he seems to be coming through the other side. So just wish to him congratulations, say well done.
No, that's brilliant. I think it's always important, Stevie, to give people a wee bit of credit in the world of Celtic. You get to know a lot of folk in the world of Celtic. I mean, see, when I started writing my book, one thing that became pretty clear back in 2010, as it was 10 years ago, that's scary, is that Celtic fans were willing to help you with absolutely no other reason. There was no condition, they just wanted to help you. So I've met some incredible people, because what happens is you're a Celtic fan and you go through that process of going to the games and meeting people on the bus and all the different characters and personalities, Stevie, and you realise that you feel a sense of belonging at Celtic Park because these are your people, and you've got so much in common. But then when I started moving into the realms of trying to speak to people to pull a book together, I realised, A, that I didn't know as much about Celtic as I thought I did, because then you start talking to people whose minds are unbelievable in terms of the history and facts and figures. But the amount of folk that just come in and they're just genuinely good people. So it's great to definitely highlight that. So a great shout out to wee Declan. You will have seen Declan McConville on this podcast a few times. Declan also joined us in the early days when we used to record in Stirling. Yep. And he's written for the website. And hopefully there's a bright future for Declan in Scottish journalism, however that may look and appear in the years to come, because he's a young guy just starting off, Stevie. And he's a good Celtic man.
I've met him a few times. I think Declan would be able to adapt, even as the media comes into a new generation of publicity and how it works. Declan will adapt to that. He's a lovely, likeable lad, and I can't thank him enough for what he's done for Jimmy and for being elected as the president of the university. It's a great accolade for a young man.
Good on you, Declan. Hopefully you're tuning in, and if so, give us a shout. We're going to be talking about a few things. I mean, we led with the fact that Celtic supporters are there, and they're always there. I must admit that I was very annoyed at myself that I never got to meet Tommy Burns, My first game I ever went to, Stevie, was Tommy Burns' testimonial. And there was so much about that game that, when I look back, was important and relevant in my Celtic supporting life. You always remember your first game. I always find it weird when people say, I can't actually remember who we were playing. I remember everything vividly that day. And Dalglish was the manager or player manager. Had he stopped playing at that time? He certainly didn't play that day for Liverpool. And then Danny McGrain came on the park at the end of the game where Tommy had been freed in the pre-season. But But I never met Tommy, unfortunately. But those words resonate with Celtic. It meant, I mean, simple words, but they resonate all these years later. They're there, and they're always there. Now, that means a lot. That means a lot to you and I and everybody else tuning in. But we were chatting before we came on, Stevie, and you made a fantastic point, because we touched on, during the week there, we touched on the fact that where we are just now, you know, as Celtic supporters, we're facing massive challenges. And again, we'll touch on things that have happened this week in relation to the coronavirus and the lockdown and the pandemic. And people might be sick of listening to that, so we won't labour that side of it. But what it comes down to is that our club will survive because of the fans.
Definitely. Tommy Burns was a great man. Great man. I'm lucky enough to meet Tommy on numerous occasions, spent a lot of time with him. An absolutely wonderful, funny guy, great knowledge of football, but an absolute gentleman. My take on this, when Tommy made that famous statement, it was about looking up to the Celtic supporters. They were there in spirit, in person, and vocally. But I think it's really relevant to 3 occasions in the past and in the present where it's not a match that's involved. If we take it back to the formation, and it's brother Walfred, John Glass, Hugh Darroch amongst others, who rightly get the praise for starting the Celtic Football Club. But the Celtic fans at that time turned up after their work, if they were unemployed, to build the stadium. Mm-hmm. So that was their contribution to start the club and give us a stadium that was really our spiritual home. If we move fast forward to Fergus McCann, Brian Dempsey, Celts for Change coming in for the share issue, changing the shape of the club. But Fergus speaks fondly and astonished that when he was looking out the window and the Celtic fans were snaked down Kerrydale Street by the old nursery, by the old ticket office with their forums in their hand and the money that they stole for their children's piggy banks to invest in Celtic Football Club.
Yeah.
The emotion the fans invested, that was that time. This season, we've got Peter Law, we've got Dermot Desmond, we've got Neil Lennon. But the Celtic fans, knowing fine well they weren't going to get in to see a game, invested. So the transfer window, great for the club, and the men I've spoken about I greatly admire. But my admiration for the Celtic fans and giving that money, they fans, and I was emotional on Monday night after the transfer window, those fans bought Celtic and ensured Celtic would win 10 in a row on Monday night by their financial backing of the club. Mm-hmm. We kept everybody. We bought all the good players. Now, I don't think there's a Celtic fan who believed that we would hold on to all our players after we get beat with Ferencváros. We thought we would sell 1 and maybe 2.
Yeah.
We've not done any of that. And that's down to the Celtic fans. This is their time, and they stepped up to the plate big time. And as a Celtic fan, I can't thank them enough for backing the club.
You're 100% right, Stevie. I mean, looking back to those days leading up to the transfer window, we spoke about it on here. I reckon we would lose 1. I thought we'd definitely lose 1. But there was also that wee niggling thought in the back of my mind. The one that we were going to lose was going to be Encham in my mind. But then Ryan Christie, there was a niggling doubt in my mind that he would still be a Celtic player after the transfer window closed. But you're right, the only way the club could take that stance and not only keep our best players, but bring in some real quality was due to the investment of the Celtic supporters. And today of all days, you've got to remember that. I mean, this is difficult. This is difficult for Celtic fans and just the public in general. A very, very difficult time. We're facing times we'll never ever face again. In 20 or 30 years, if I'm still lucky enough to be here, Stevie, we'll look back on these times, just like your grandparents look back on the wartime, you know, and it'll be alien to the future generations as to what is happening and what we are currently living. And the only way that we can get through that with the club intact is by putting our hands in our pockets and being loyal and being the best supporters in the world, which I truly believe, as cliched as it sounds, I truly believe Celtic fans are.
Well, when the share issue took place, it was the most successful club issue ever.
Mm-hmm.
This is our war, Paul. This is our war. You speak to your parents, your grandparents, and they talk about the war effort. This is an invisible war we're fighting. There's no planes, there's no tanks, there's no troops, but we're fighting a war. And the Celtic fans' war effort was to keep the club alive. when we spoke in a previous podcast and you asked who's the dangers to 10 in a row, I stated it would only be within Celtic. I firmly believe we won 10 in a row on Monday night. And I think, say, I'm a great fan of Peter Law and Dermot Desmond, but my admiration for the Celtic fans this week has went up a notch. And I know they made the investment earlier on, but it was their investment that allowed this to happen.
Yeah. That's why I think sometimes when, and we've spoken about it this week, when people in the media who were so-called Celtic-minded, who were of a Celtic state of mind, come out and criticise the club, because you take it personally. You actually take it personally, Stevie.
I think Hugh McDonald, I listened to him speaking about Charlie, and probably that's who you're talking about. He says, if you're doing a piece for a paper and you make the piece and it's something that everybody agrees with, you should put it in the bin. If Charlie Nicholas genuinely believes what he wrote or was allowed to be printed in his name the other day, then I've got serious concerns about Charlie. You know, that maybe his mental health's not in a great state. Because you really couldn't write that article with pure clarity. It was so much nonsense.
Saying that we take the cheap option.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to be speaking about the upcoming game. There's so much to consider about the upcoming game. And the story, of course, Stevie, that's been all over the press, and quite rightly so, is that we've been hit with the coronavirus. Our playing staff has been hit and affected by the coronavirus. So we spoke yesterday about Odsonne Edouard, and please don't for a moment think that we're taking it lightly, that a footballer is positive with coronavirus, but he'll be all right because he's a footballer. So concerns are there for the health and the fitness of Odsonne Edouard first and foremost. If he doesn't play against Rangers, as long as he's okay, that's the most important thing. Of course, as football fans, we want him to be playing against Rangers, but looking at the date and the timeline, Steve, it looks as though he's going to be coming back the day or the night before the game. On the Friday night, he's going to return back to Scotland. That set of circumstances isn't ideal, even if he's raring to go and he's fit and it's not affected him that much.
I think it's a ludicrous situation that we're playing international football at all.
Yes.
During this current pandemic. It's too dangerous. It sort of relates to something. I heard the show at the weekend with yourself, Colin, Lawrence, and I heard you speaking it with the guys, including Kevin on Monday, and about the refereeing performance. If I had anything to do with Celtic, I'm not a great one for coming out and making written statements unless it's really relevant. I would have withdrawn all the Celtic players from the Scotland squad and just left it at that. Then when they come back, then I've obviously got the right to reply, and I would have stated it's the brutality of the St Johnstone players on Sunday, the ineptitude of Nick Walsh not to challenge that brutality, so all my players were injured. That would have prevented this, and it would have killed two birds with one stone. Because if you deny the Scotland national team the use of our players, then we wouldn't be having this talk. I know Eddie's away with France, but if you're in your social bubble, which you are when you're domestic league, I don't think we should be allowed to get into another domestic bubble. When you're getting all these restrictions as an individual placed on you, then I don't think even the elite support players should be allowed to go to a different country.
It seems ludicrous, Stephen. I know, like you say there, when you're an elite sports person and you're getting that level of testing, and that's obviously the caveat, I think. But the flip side of that is there's people who can't travel to see their loved ones in different regions, and you know, they're travelling all over the world. They're getting groups of players together who are travelling from all over the world to be part of the camp. They're then travelling to another country to play the games. It's inevitable that there are going to be outbreaks, and that's exactly what we've seen. The Ryan Christie situation, we spoke about Christie just a moment ago in relation to the will he stay or will he go leading up to transfer deadline day, and I think you're of the same mind as me. It was so important to keep Ryan Christie. Yesterday there was a wee bit of criticism about Christie, and I had to look at my notes just for the second half of the last European game, where he was part of everything we did creatively. Everything we created in the second half against Sarajevo came through Ryan Christie, be that a corner, a cross, a pass, a shot. I mean, the goal itself came from a strike from Ryan Christie that was spilled by the goalkeeper. But it seems to me that, you know, if you stick rigidly to the rules as they've been set out, it's going to be extremely unfair and a lack of common sense, actually, that Ryan Christie is going to miss the Rangers game.
you can go and, I know they don't want to get too political, but Jason Leitch gets great praise in this country for his handling of the COVID pandemic. But he made a comment last week that at this time the pubs were to close at 10 p.m. But if the Scotland-Israel game was to get into extra time and penalties, he was quite happy for the pubs to stay open to the game finished. So they have a wee hotline to the COVID germ and say, listen, just stay away for the last half hour because it's going to go to penalties. Some of the things that they're coming up with is absolutely nonsensical. You know, I think it was great with Mike Mulroney last week coming and going, this is a political thing, it's not a scientific thing to stop crowds going back to football. Because I'm greatly aware of this pandemic. I've lost some people to it, but we need to be a wee bit more rational, you know, in what we're doing. Now, I'm not the expert, but surely everybody can see one of the causes of the rise is the students and the schools going back. But we're not closing them again because there's too much money coming into the universities and to the halls of residence where the students coming back.
So then it becomes political.
The
big thing I would say at this juncture, Stevie, is on a Celtic state of mind. We're here to talk about Celtic. The situation we're in at the moment is we need to speak about the coronavirus because our players are being affected by it. And if we're going to talk about the upcoming fixture, then we can't avoid it. A lot of people come on the comments, normally after the broadcast is finished, and I see them the following morning, Stevie, giving us stick because we are falling for the government hoax, which is the coronavirus pandemic. And that beggars belief. I've had people coming on and making comments that, you know, we are being controlled because we're agreeing to wear masks. The coronavirus doesn't exist. That kind of thing, Celtic fan or not, you're getting blocked. That's just a nonsense. Anybody that comes away with that obviously hasn't lost anybody to this horrific illness, you know. And people whose partners or family members might be working on the front line know exactly how it's affecting people on a secondary level as well. So I'm just not having that. If anybody comes on and makes that kind of comment, they're just getting blocked.
You've got conspiracy theorists and everybody, you know, and if that's what they believe, then good on them. But that this disease is real. Why would they try and shut down the whole world the way it is done? What would be the political gains for anybody to shut us down the way they've done and really tank the economy in most of the countries? I couldn't really see a reasoning for that.
No, and the difficulty for me, Steve, it's affecting everybody, so it's going to come into conversation in any case. But this is a Celtic broadcast. We're talking about Edouard and Christie who have been affected directly or indirectly with this virus. We're going to discuss it, and we make no apology for discussing it. And anybody out there who has lost anybody to this terrible illness, you know, my heart goes out to them because it's horrific, it's unpredictable, and it's changing. You know, so by the time we get a handle on it, it might have changed again. So it's a moving target, isn't it?
Well, again, everybody's got their own wee personal story. My uncle Frank died very early in it. Frank was an elderly man and was affected greatly by it. But my auntie Jean, who'd been married to Frank for 65 years, at that time she couldn't attend his funeral because she was shielding. So if anybody tells me that's not a horror story and her family weren't allowed to get into her house, now Jean's a very strong, powerful woman even for her age, her family had to stay at the window and look in at their mum grieving. So don't tell me it doesn't exist because I would strongly disagree with you on that.
100%, Stevie. Now we're going to have a look at some of the comments that are coming in. At one point I wanted the audience to see you in all your glory, Stevie, so you took up the whole screen, but when I did that your sound cut off. And what I love though is that the people watching tell you straight away, so that's brilliant. Thank you very much for the comments. But you're back now. Kevin Graham, good afternoon. Troops, Kevin, I'm looking forward to you coming back in to see us, if you're allowed, on Monday. And Stephen Forbes mentions that he was listening to an appearance that I made on a separate podcast, if we're allowed to mention separate podcasts, Football CFB. Of course we are, because it's Callum McFadden who runs that one, and he'll be joining us next week at some point. And learn that we're around the same age, we're both paper boys and played left back. There you go. Well, played is pushing it a wee bit in my case, Stephen. Imagine in Axom FC, which positions would the other pundits play? Well, I'm probably talking to the star man, Stevie, because you had a bit of a career yourself playing midfield, or was it?
Midfield sweeper.
Yeah. Sweeper, there's a dying art, right? Or a dead art. Nobody plays sweeper these days.
No. Play free at the back. Get a sweeper. Get Martin Buchan type player. Can't beat it.
Now, will there ever be a place in the game for a sweeper again, Stevie? Can you? Because the game's changing all the time. Sometimes people do something really basic, like, oh, let's switch to a 4-3-3, and it's like revolutionary, because that's what we're seeing at the moment with Atalanta. So, will we ever see the return of the sweeper? I thought it was quite an iconic position. It was the coolest player on the park played sweeper.
I think now, because of your goalkeepers being so talented, they're sort of sweeper keepers, aren't they? Again, if you were going to be playing a team, and very few teams do it, and you had two big centre forwards, then if it was Celtic, for example, you could match up Julian, Duffy and Ayer could sweep. And it's the easiest position in the world to play if you've got good positional sense. Everybody else is doing your work and you just look good.
Hey, listen, that's all right. Yeah, I could live with that. Who else would play elsewhere on the pitch? Kevin Graham, I think, holds a local record for the most unused substitute appearances, so he would be carrying the hampers. It's decorating afternoon, and welcome back. You're watching on YouTube. For anyone who is watching on YouTube and you've not subscribed, please click on the subscribe button, because we are trying to build up the audience as much as we possibly can. Red Scotland was more of a hatchet man with pace and strength and a first touch like an elephant. What was it they said? You could trap a ball further than I could kick it. That's what it sounds like.
Medicine ball in a phone box.
I love when you're talking to somebody and they tell you about that niggling elbow injury that stopped them. It prevented them from progressing in the world of football. Maybe you just weren't good enough, But we all played with some great players. If you were to think back, Stevie, to somebody who might, not be known, that you played with that should have made the grade. Everybody knows somebody that should have made it. Who would your player be? Yeah,
Jerry Griffin. Jerry Griffin was a sensational footballer. Came from Springburn, one of the rougher areas of North Glasgow. Again, had a liking for the old booze. Jerry, we played for St Catherine's Boys Guild at under 18s, and we got to the semi-final Scottish Cup, which was unheard of for a Boys Guild team. Jerry then got invited, because we played St Francis's of Dundee in the semi-final at James McGrory Park, although it was Proven Mill Park at that time. Jerry then got invited up to Tannadice for a week's trial, which usually Jim McLean at that time had boys in for 13 and 14.
Yeah.
Jerry got invited up at 18. Tuesday night, somebody at a plant in the digs asked Jerry, do you want to go for a pint? Jerry, Springburn, no problem, my friend, I'm with you. And get found in a hedge the next day, and sent down the road. But it had absolutely everything that you would have looked for in a centre forward. Very Duncan Ferguson like. Real good, talented player, Jerry Griffin.
Duncan Ferguson, now, Celtic fans may not like me saying this, but I thought he was a tremendous striker, and had things gone differently, not only with his injuries, but obviously with his falling out with the SFA, he would have been a great Scotland striker as well.
He, when he left Tannadice, should have came to us. And then he would have progressed to England. But the way he's still in the regard he's still held by the Everton fans after all these years tells you everything you need to know about his talent as a footballer. A real talent.
Oh, brilliant. Now, Paul Campbell, you're tuning in from Dusseldorf in Germany. I love hearing where our listeners are listening from, because we do sometimes get the analytics, which is a big thing in football these days, Stevie. And it tells us that they're from far-flung places like, Venezuela and Costa Rica. And that just... I think that baffles me, but it's great. It's great. And that's why sometimes, obviously, we need to make sure that we're verbalising words properly, so that we can go beyond the Raploch and Stirling and Fife villages and places like that. But Fife's the place to be at the moment, is it not?
How's that?
Oh, you can come to Fife, get a bevy.
We'll be up on the weekend.
Dominant decade, green and white. You're commenting on YouTube. Paul, I would like to highlight the work of the board and congratulate them for backing the manager. It goes back to the point you opened with, Stevie. Brilliant. Absolutely delighted with the board. But the real, the backbone there, the backbone that's allowed us to do that is the support.
The supporters have allowed it, but we would have to have had the backing of the board. I don't even think this would have just been simply a Peter Law or Dermot decision. I think they would have had to the board meeting to go, listen, this is what we're going through, the loss of revenue, how are we going to cover it? As I say, in previous years, I've no doubt we would have sold at least 2 players. I think the board, personally and business-wise, have bought into 10 in a row and realised the magnitude of what we might achieve this season.
Well, what happens is we talk about the 10, we talk about 10 in a row all the time. And I mean, what I try and do is I try and think about what it actually means. What does it mean to the Celtic fan base? And for me, I'm 42 almost, Stevie. For my Celtic supporting life, what it means is there's a 9 in a row, which I think is untainted. And that was Celtic's original 9 in a row. The second 9 in a row in Scottish football, for me, I think there's always a question mark about the validity of that 9. But in the record books, it's 9v9. And the only way that you can airbrush that is by beating it. And that is why I think the 10 is so important. Celtic then, doesn't matter what your perception is of who won what and the validity of those honours, Celtic have won 10, nobody can argue.
I slightly disagree with you. I don't think there's any ambiguity about our 9 either. We won that fair and square. Leagues all over Europe were getting called the same. We've won 9 titles in a row. It wouldn't have mattered if it would have been played to its entirety. We would have still won that. We're now going into uncharted territory, even with the trebles. You know, the day we won the Invincible treble, and then say when you've come out after the treble, and you're getting emotional, because I personally didn't believe the footballing authorities would ever have allowed us to win that. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought the referees would have had to get involved. So we're progressing like no other club. It's great that we have such great Celtic people in charge of a club, but the lifeblood of Celtic, and I'm not going to go away for this today, is the Celtic fans. Mm-hmm. Now, they might be the guy in Germany, they might be the guy in Venezuela. I get contacted a couple of months ago because somebody heard me on your podcast from Russia, Ralph Collins, and he made a donation to Rocktalk because they're sitting, listen in Russia, they're all working in these pipelines, and we're the lifeblood of getting Celtic talk when they're sitting off doing their work. Their work's finished, they need something Celtic.
That's brilliant to hear. That's amazing to hear, isn't it? Yeah. And they were able to donate to Rocktalk.
To Rocktalk.
Superb. Now, any opportunity whatsoever to bring up Rocktalk, so now that you've mentioned it, Steve, how important has that been during the lockdown? I know we've mentioned it before, but, you know, someone might be tuning in for the first time who's struggling through this situation we're in, but just struggling in general with their mental health. Tell us all about Rocktalk. Let us know what it is you do, how people can get involved.
I initiated Rocktalk, well, it's maybe about a year ago now, but it's a Sunday morning for 11 o'clock, and it's just 11 o'clock to 1. People come in, and we just sit and have a roll and sausage, a cup of tea, we talk about the football, and then we challenge people's week, how it's went, their mental health aspect, what we can do to help them, and what help they need from us. That's the concept of it, and that still takes place every Sunday morning. During the pandemic, after about 4 to 6 weeks, when you were allowed to go out, we opened up the club, and people weren't working, they were furloughed, they were getting frustrated in the house. So we then created like a wee men's working group. Mm-hmm. So they come in every day and they would get tasks to fulfil. And I think these men are a complete inspiration to anybody. They're still there to this day. The transformations they've made, they've never looked for a penny for their work, their endeavours, their skills. They're real credit to themselves and their family, and they're still there to this day. If I go back up when I leave here, they'll be there working, and they'll tell me what they've done during the day. The place is absolutely beautiful down to these guys working away.
No, that's brilliant. And again, you know, I'm no expert, but we do go out to a big audience now, Stevie, and if anybody is struggling and they want to talk about it, we know people. Yeah. We know people who we can put you in touch with.
You can't shy away from this new, and it's no a competition. You know, people say, oh, suicide, pandemic. It's not a competition. They're two totally separate things. The pandemic has caused people, even people in good employment, who would go to an office environment, catch up with their colleagues, work away, have a wee catch up around the tea machine, the coffee machine, talk across the desk. They're now working from home. Mm-hmm. And some people are really finding that extremely difficult because it's total isolation.
Yeah.
You know, and you can go into a wee conference call at 11 o'clock with your colleagues. It's not the same with face-to-face interaction with people. You know, even if you're having to do it through wearing a mask, talk to people and engage with people. It's you can't border it up. It'll really affect you.
Oh, definitely. It's something that maybe in the past we took for granted, Stevie, but if you go days on end without any human interaction, it starts to become damaging.
Well, so some of the offices, Paul, have been told they won't be going back to March at the earliest. That's a full calendar year that people haven't had that social interaction with their work colleagues. Now, if they're in a domestic environment, well, they stay themselves, or they've only got a young child, or maybe 2 young children, they might not be in a relationship. How hard is that? You know, now you're getting stopped again for seeing different households. We really need to be aware of the situation, and people need to be aware that don't bottle this up. You know, there's loads of great help out there, great organisations. Get involved. They're all there for the same reason as you. You won't be an isolated case, and you won't stick out like sore thumb. You're only one of the people who are there. No,
that's great, and we'll continue to highlight the work that you do at Rocktalk as much as we possibly can, Stevie, on a Celtic state of mind. Magnet67, good to see that you're joining us via YouTube. Our fan base truly is a family and more. We are a force for social good. Look at the amazing stuff that the Green Brigade organise to help the communities across the country. Keep up the great work. Yeah, big shout out to the Green Brigade. They do some fantastic work, don't they?
I've had a lot of interaction with the Green Brigade because we obviously facilitate the anti-discrimination tournament at James McGrory Park. They're fantastic guys, you know, and quite different in their aspects and their age group to maybe what people would expect them to be. They're not young boys. A lot of them are sort of men, but they really conduct themselves very, very well. They've got great ideas. They're very respectful, and they're welcome back at James McGrory anytime.
Now, you know, another thing, Stevie, we were talking earlier about, obviously, you know, there's so many people that you come into contact with. It's just been called the Celtic family, but within the world of Celtic, as a Celtic supporter, that had it not been for Celtic are the magnet, aren't they? Had it not been for Celtic, you would know loads and loads of people that you get to know and become firm friends with. But there's so many people pass through the gates at Celtic Park, and more so now than ever in terms of playing personnel as well. And there was a player that came and went, probably not even a footnote in the history of Brendan Rodgers' time at Celtic, and it was Charlie Musonda. But I was saddened to read this morning that Charlie Musonda has been told by specialists that his career is over at the age of just 23. Now, he's still a Chelsea player. He came to Celtic during the time of Brendan Rodgers. He made 8 appearances and scored 1 goal. He's got 51 underaged caps for Belgium. I mean, when we brought him in, his loan fee was over £2 million, which shows you the kind of stature and the level and the pedigree of that boy at that time. And he's had major knee trouble since leaving Celtic Park. I seen a quote this morning: "I'll keep training and believing in the impossible comeback." Sad to hear, any player, but it's sad to hear a player like Charlie, who obviously we know, having played for Celtic.
Absolutely heartbreaking. You know, the work to get the amount of caps. He's obviously been an absolute star as a kid coming through. To get to that age, you know, you're thinking you're just ready to make the breakthrough into the big time, you know, and all the acclaim and stardom that comes with it. To be hit with that news that your career's finished, that's something that has to be managed as well. It's not just his football career that's finished, that whole part of his life, you know, where it's morning, noon and night, as we've spoken about before, the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week athlete.
Yes.
That finishes. So how does somebody like Charlie Musonda, who's still only a kid, deal with that away from the park? That's something where you would hope Chelsea would incorporate him into something where he becomes a coach, but part of the staff, so he's just not cut off at 23 years of age. And his days are full. He's nothing to fill them with. It
goes back to what we've been discussing in relation to your mental well-being. Stevie, when you're a footballer, and I don't know because I wasn't there, I've spoken to plenty of players that your whole life, you know, your childhood, your schooling, everything revolves around football, sometimes to the detriment of your schooling and your education. And I'm not saying that stereotypically, but your focus is on football. So by the time you're 23, you have nothing else. if that's taken away from you, that could really harm you mentally as well.
I reckon everybody apart from my family that I know is basically through football. You know, and if you're a footballer and saying that I didn't make any great strides in professional football or anything, but if I went into the town on a Saturday night or went to the dancing on a Saturday night, I would know loads of people through football. You know, guys who would maybe start a works team. Do you fancy playing for us? So I would then go and play for a works team. Say it was like Govan Shipyards. For Govan, you go and play, and that's other guys. You get back into 2 o'clock. They go, how are you doing? So football's a great social aspect. And Big Andy Cameron, who you've met through the show as well, Andy's great with youths. And I says to him, what would be your thing? He says, always try and get them a job. Not a job. Get them a game in a football team. He says, why would you do that? He says, because then they've got the social aspects. If they're going out after the game and you're not working and you're in the team, somebody will know my dad's looking for somebody, my work's looking for somebody. So it then gets them into employment. He says football's the greatest thing you can give to kids to play.
Oh, 100%. I agree with that. And I mean, again, not even as far as yourself, I never kicked a ball after about the age of 18. But you meet people 20 years later or more. And it's through football that you know them. And it's incredible all these years later that link's still there. It's so important on a social level, in a social environment. And that's why it's difficult as well for all these people that devote their life to football teams who are not professional teams and youth teams who can't play. And, you know, these regulations that are coming in, Stevie, they're so disappointing for so many people. And we'll lose a lot of people to the game.
But even if you look at your own show, everybody comes in here, but we've all got in common. Celtic Football Club.
Exactly.
So you've known all these guys now, you're putting out a fantastic product that's a new media, but your base level for you all is Celtic Football Club.
Celtic, that's a connection.
You know, so football has brought all you together. Then you'll meet people that they know, so that starts expanding as well. It's absolutely fantastic. Anybody who's listening, you've got children or anything, I know that they'll be curtailed a wee bit because of the pandemic, get them involved in football team, boys and girls. It's a real growing sport, the girls' football. Get them involved. It's great.
It's brilliant. You get to see a bit of the world, even as a youth, you know, travelling around playing in tournaments as well. So yeah, all the best to Charlie Musonda. He's still fighting. He reckons he might come back. He's called it the impossible dream.
Hopefully the boy can maybe do the same as Marvin Andrews, you know, and just play on. You know, they can be overcome, but usually the specialists will be right most of the time.
It always takes me back when I hear that, and it is sad, but Celtic win the European Cup 1967. Had social media been around back then during the pre-season or the transfer window, even though it wasn't a window that closed shut, it would have been carnage, Stevie, because when you look back, the players that we brought in after we won the European Cup, Pat McMahon from junior football, Kilsyth, and Chris Shevlin, who had been told to retire whilst playing for Hearts, and Jockstein got him out of retirement as a cover for right back. Now, that was our two marquee signings after winning the European Cup. Imagine social media was kicking about back then.
I think probably Mr. Steen would have got criticism, and I think this is where Neil Lennon's probably even more fortunate, because he seems to escape criticism because he's got so many high profile fans, you know, and if you dare say anything that they disagree with, you get shouted down through the rooftops. I don't think anybody should be above criticism if you think that they've done something wrong. We talk about, I heard even in the last couple of days, you know, about the transfer window, and we're usually late to the party. We had 2 centre forwards in situ when we played Ferencváros. The guys were there.
Yeah. Now, one of the guys was Patrick Klimala. Now, I've been looking at Klimala, I've been looking at the striker situation. We're going to be talking to you about, at the moment, your predicted 11, because the one that we gave yesterday might have had Ryan Christie in it. Yeah. And it's a changing situation. And as we speak just now, Ryan Christie won't be one of those players. I'm hoping that, you know, after we've had our meeting with the Scottish Government personnel, that a decision will be made on that, Stevie, because it does seem absurd to stick to a regulation when Christie's never shown any kind of positive result. He's done nothing wrong. The club have released a statement, and we are hoping that Christie will be part of that. But today, we couldn't select him for the Celtic team. One of the questions yesterday is, who do we play up front? I was looking at Patrick Klimala. He's a guy that you said no one should be above criticism. I criticised Klimala at the beginning of the season. I didn't think he had what it took to play for Celtic. I think he's proven me wrong. I think he's proving me wrong. So I was having a wee look at Klimala, because obviously he's a guy that will definitely be in line for a start. Whether or not Neil Lennon picks him is another question, and I'll ask you if you would pick him. He just turned 22 in August, so he's the same age as Edouard. And, even for Poland under 21, where he is just now, because he is due to play against Serbia tomorrow, 3 goals in 9. So prolific for his international team. He's made 11 appearances this season, scored 3 goals. That's a goal every 83 minutes. So he's been prolific. That's like a goal a game, if you like. And he's only started 1 league game, actually. And the question would be, does he start against Rangers? But the other question that we've been asking over the last few weeks is, since James Forrest was injured, where's our backup on the right? We expected maybe to get someone out on the right. I was looking at his previous career prior to coming to Celtic. He is also a right winger. Would we maybe consider him as backup should Frimpong get injured or lose his form? Is Klimala an option elsewhere on the park as well as up front?
I've never seen him shown any defensive qualities, Paul, so if he's a winger, he might just be a winger. So then you would need to change the formation of your team to allow Patrick Klimala to play wide. We bit like Jeremy Frimpong, because I think Jeremy Frimpong's been really, really impressive the last few games, but I don't think he's getting any defensive qualities. So Klimala may follow that pattern. If you're asking me for the next game at Celtic Park against Rangers, no for me to be wide right.
No,
it would be no.
Centre forward?
I think we would need to examine the whole thing. I know you're talking about a team, but I think there's got to be a few things into consideration before you pick a team. You need to take the previous games that you've played against Rangers, where I think we've been overrun in the middle of the park.
Yeah.
You're going to be facing something that nobody can give you an experience, which is an empty stadium. Have you ever walked out at Celtic Park and there's nobody in it? It's a very, very emotional thing. You walk out that tunnel and you only see the ghosts of the past. I was lucky enough to do it when the jungle was there, and that's your time. Now you've got this view, and you think of all the people that went before you, the great Celtic players. So you get a wee bit emotional when it's empty and it looks bigger than what you do if you walk out and it's full. So you need to have players who can overcome that emotion. Then you need players who can overcome the fact that there's no vocal backing for the magnificent Celtic support.
Yeah.
So they've got to go in with a totally different mindset. Bearing in mind, is it okay to talk about Rangers on the show? That's who our opponent's got to be, right? Rangers are a wee bit like Nando's, right? All the real work's done in the kitchen and it looks nice when it comes outside. The boy Beale is the main driving force at Rangers. Stephen Gerrard's the bit that's outside. He's the theatre. He's a big name. What's getting done? So if you're going to play Rangers, in my opinion, the 3 threats that Rangers pose to you, they're 2 fullbacks and Ryan Kent.
Yeah.
I don't think there's another threat in the team. So if you go back to the 29th of December, Rangers played 3 up front, and every time we threw the ball out, they were on top of us. To our good guys in possession, Aya, Julien, started getting a bit panicky. At the other end, we backed off them. And you've got guys like Goldson coming out and hitting passes like Beckenbauer because we didn't close them down. So when you start against them a week on Saturday, you're starting with a point. So that's the worst I think you should come away with that game from. Because I think we've got better players. I think we should have a better setup. So do you start the game to combat their players, or do you become a wee bit more on the front foot with the threat of getting overrun? So that's the tactical balance that Neil Lennon's got to have. We have got a fantastic squad. So do you keep it tight for an hour, then unleash the big guns, and hopefully run them ragged, or do you try and put them under pressure from the start of the game?
Exactly. Well, I'm going to give you what I think we should do, and I'm thinking along the lines of attacking the two fullbacks who you've mentioned, who, for all intents and purposes, I mean, Celtic fans, you know, generally we can look at a Rangers side and say, well, they wouldn't get in our team, etc. Sometimes it's difficult to remain kind of balanced when you're viewing the players, but obviously there's a few decent players in that squad. You know, you can't deny that, Stevie, exactly what you say there. And I think Barisic is a fantastic player. So what I would do is you've got to start with Frimpong. I mean, what Frimpong's been doing over the last few games is tremendous, even against St Johnstone. I'll ask you your thoughts on that as well, just in a few moments. So Frimpong on the right, is it a risk to start with Laxalt on the left? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to start Laxalt on the left and get the two of them attacking the two fullbacks who you've already mentioned. Pin them back. Pin the two fullbacks back, because they are the two players within that team, or two of the main players in that team that I think can harm you. Barkas is a first choice every day of the week, and you're then looking, do I play with the three centre-halves? Yes. Even though Laxalt and Frimpong are going to be bombing up and down the right and left, and I agree with you in terms of Frimpong as a defender. I don't think he's got that defensive quality. You're probably looking for one of your centre-halves to be covering quite a bit there. Laxalt, I think that he's an up and down the park player. Stevie Ray, if he's watching, knows a wee bit more about Laxalt as well. The question is, who do you play in the centre? Because I think El Hamid is a solid performer. He's a cool performer, and he's very good behind Frimpong. I'm not going to start him. I think Julien and Ayer, which I still think is your best partnership if you were to pick two defenders, with Duffy. And I feel that Duffy is definitely improving Ayer. I think he's doing a lot of Ayer's thinking for him. He's telling him where to go. He's telling him what to do. We've seen a lot less of Ayer's galloping runs, haven't we?
Yes.
Is that down to Duffy? I don't know. But I think he's been a good influence on him. So Duffy, Julien and Ayer. But obviously in the back of your mind, the fact that Frimpong's defensive work isn't the best. That might be countered by his pace. He can get into good positions. That's great. But once you're in that position, you've got to make sure you're making a difference. Brown and McGregor, in many ways, pick themselves in the engine room, the Celtic midfield, particularly Brown, in a fixture like this. Normally, I'd have picked Christie to play in that, is it even called a number 10 role, you know, that support man role. Christie's out of that game today. That might change. I hope it does. Then the question is, do you start Turnbull? I wouldn't. I'd start Ncham in there. I'm a big fan of Ncham, and I know that a lot of Celtic fans don't think he has the consistency, but he has performed well against Rangers, and I think that in a game like this, he certainly isn't going to be phased. And I'm not saying Turnbull would be, Stevie, but we spoke about debuts in Celtic Rangers games in the past, and I'm giving a debut to Laxalt. But the reason I don't think it's going to affect him as much is because he's coming in from the unknown. Turnbull is a guy who knows the Scottish game, and it might be too much in terms of the way that this game is built up, even without the crowd. Then the big question is, what do you do up front? I don't think Edouard's going to start under the circumstances. I'm taking absolutely everything seriously in relation to his positive test, but also he's going to be out of the country until the Friday night before the game, and hopefully we'll be able to put a broadcast out on that Friday night. So I would start with Eddie on the bench. It's been a lot, obviously, for him as well. We don't know in terms of his own conditioning and his fitness how he's going to be feeling. Then you ask yourself the El Yunusi question. He came in, scored that goal, kept his place, deservedly, went off the boil a wee bit since then, but not to the concern. So who do you start? And I've already bigged up Klimala. I think Klimala's our fittest striker at the moment. I'm not going to start with him though. I'm going to start with El Yunusi playing just off Lee Griffiths. So that's my team. I think Griffiths will run himself ragged.
Neil Lennon will start with? No, in a million years. I don't think Neil Lennon will start with that team. I think it's hard if you're the manager of a club to say this is how we want to play and then change it for a specific game. But if you want to be a wee bit tactically aware, do we bring Rangers out and counteract them the way we've faced every other game we play? Because if they're coming at you, then we can attack them. So if you're going to 3-5-2, 4-5-1, there's millions of formations and they should be flexible where you can even sometimes you can go 4-3-3. It's a real dilemma for Neil. He'll probably be having sleepless nights worrying about his players coming back for international duty to see who's available. You know, we're only doing this basically as a bit of fun with the personnel that we know is available at present.
Well, I mentioned yesterday about Klimala. Do I think Lenny will start with him? I don't know. I think he might. I actually think he might. It's a big question. Griffiths, right, comes on and we're full of glee after he scores that goal and we're all chuffed for him. Of course we are. We've been banging on about Lee Griffiths all season. How fit is he? How fit is he after that 15-20 minute run out? Yet he's coming back from injury. Eddie is in isolation at the moment. Klimala's the fittest guy on the books at the moment up front.
I think it's just to close down. Yeah, well, one of the best performances I've seen in recent years when we worked really hard was against Borussia Mönchengladbach.
Yeah.
And one of the points I was hoping to make today, when we play against all these teams sitting in and we seem to struggle a wee bit, now I think the best team in Europe, if not the world just now, is Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich face that every time, but they've devised a formation where they can overcome that. But the most striking thing about their players, and these are world-class players, is their work ethic. You know, they don't stop. You've got Lewandowski getting into the left-back position to challenge to win the ball. Thomas Müller running about as if he's a sprightly kid. We can overcome that, but we just need to decide how we're going to target the Rangers game. Are we going to be offensive, try and put them under pressure, or go for the bases? We've got a point, and the worst we're coming away from is a point.
No, I mean, again, I'll just run through my team again because I think at some point the mic dropped out and very quickly got it back on seamlessly. But again, the audience told us that it dropped out, which is great. Barkas and goals for me, Stevie. Duffy, Julian and Ayer at the back three. Laxalt on the left, Frimpong on the right. The engine room is Brown and McGregor with Encham in front, and I would start with Griff and El Yunusi. How do you feel about El Yunusi in relation to the fact that we've got 4 strikers now? Where does he fit in the great scheme of things?
Well, that was one of the points I wrote down before I came through. I don't see where he fits in. If you've got 4 fit strikers, we've sort of came to the conclusion that he's not a wide left guy. He's not a central midfielder. So where does he play? Because if you're going to play, we take it with 4 strikers are fit. I don't mean particularly for the Rangers game, but when they're all fit, they've got to have a combination of the 4. You've not got 5 centre forwards. So where does El Yunusi fit into the grand scheme of things?
It's a difficult one because I think last season, if you'd asked me, he was on the left side every day of the week. This season it just wasn't happening for him, Stevie. Then he had a few good performances on the back of his international performances in the last international break, more central, and he earned his place back in that team. But then again, I was looking at El Yunusi thinking to myself, do I go with Griffin and Ayeti? But then you're playing with your two forwards then, really. El Yunusi's just off Griff. But, with a strong bench, one of the players that you might have to be taken off is El Yunusi. You don't know what you're getting from him, really. I mean, when you think back to the St Johnstone game, what was your thoughts on that? What was your takeaways from the St Johnstone game?
I thought we were really curtailed by the ineptitude of Nick Walsh, where we could have had a penalty after 5 minutes and it changes the whole dynamics of the game. I thought we were a bit ponderous. There was 2 real concerns for me. One was when we allowed Shane Duffy to go up for free kicks, and then David Turnbull was taking him short after we had praised all his great deliveries last week. If that would have been a Roy Keane, he'd have had David Turnbull by the throat. It happened 2 or 3 separate occasions. The goal was great, but again, we've got our 2 centre-backs. Now, this isn't coached, this is just sheer luck. We've got our 2 centre-backs linking, which they both done in the St Mirren game, before the ball get put in the middle of the park for Ryan Christie to deliver. When it works, it's great. But if you're that out of position, there's always a danger you'll concede a goal because you're not set up defensively in these situations. But absolutely brilliant by Christopher Ayer to feed Del Hamilton, a great ball, and absolutely off my seat when Lee Griffiths put the ball in the game. Absolutely fantastic goal.
So were we. I was talking to Jim Simonetti just yesterday. He was asking why we were out of breath when we started doing our broadcast. It's because we're diving about this studio. But yeah, I mean, it was that unbridled joy. Not only the fact that we were, winning the game, but the fact that Lee Griffiths is back. I mean, we spoke about him a hell of a lot on this podcast, and we backed him. I think generally we backed him, Stevie. But there was doubts in my mind. Will we see him back? Is it wishful thinking? Am I letting my heart rule my head? All these things were going around my own mind. So I'm delighted. I'm absolutely delighted that he's back, and I hope he can build on that.
I think it's great testimony to Neil Lennon and his backroom staff to get Lee Griffiths back playing for Celtic, because probably the odds would have been against that happening. But they've showed great patience with him, and it's great character from Lee Griffiths to get himself back, whether they'd even consider having him in the team, and to come back and have that effect and impact on a game was absolutely wonderful for him. When you spoke earlier about Christopher Ayer, I think it is Shane Duffy, because I think Shane Duffy will be thinking, we're a defence and our priority is to prevent goals. Mm-hmm. So if Christopher Ayer is constantly wandering out of position, and it's great when it works, but Shane Duffy will be feeling you're not getting me exposed because you want to go and link me play. Mm-hmm. So I think that's having an effect on how he's playing.
Seems to be doing a lot of his thinking for him.
Yep.
And that's great.
And the great thing as well is when you were able to watch the game on TV last week, is you can hear the talking that Barkas is doing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's an absolute top class goalkeeper. His distribution, the fact that he'll come and take balls 12 yards for his goal line is something. Fraser Foster was magnificent for us, but wasn't he an attribute that he possessed?
No, I think it's brilliant. I can see Barkas developing into a bit of a cult icon amongst the Celtic fans. We're not there at the moment, unfortunately. But I think, I'm just watching him. I'm thinking back to some goalkeepers in the past who have taken to our heart, one being Artur Boruc, who ended up in loads of Celtic fans' greatest ever side, even though, there was occasions where he could make a mistake here and there, Stevie. But we love Artur Boruc, and I think we're beginning to warm to Barkas.
But the great thing about goalkeepers, great goalkeepers shrug off a mistake. Mm-hmm. Because everybody, it doesn't matter what you're playing a part, you're going to make a mistake. The great goalkeepers shrug it off and go on. They'll blame a defender. They know it's their fault, but they'll blame somebody else. The guys who don't hit the peaks worry about it, and then their whole performance crumbles. Barkas a couple of wee mistakes last week. Mm-hmm. Nothing major, but he just gets on it. The next thing he comes, so that's out the picture. He'll be a very, very good goalkeeper for us.
Didn't affect him in the slightest by the looks of it. So we could be without Edouard, we could be without Christie, and Celtic spoke about his adherence to all relevant protocols, the aim to open dialogue with the Scottish Government to fully understand the situation in relation to the quarantine, after the situation with Armstrong getting sent home from the Scotland camp. It's frustrating for Celtic, it's frustrating for the fans and the players. We've got so many players out on international duty, both full internationals and under 21, Stevie. I just hope we don't hear of anybody else either contracting the virus or being exposed to the virus.
I've never met Ryan Christie, but I've got absolutely no doubt to doubt his version of events, because football players, they're young men, they're out and about. They're usually men about town, but they know the protocols. Mm-hmm. Anybody who ignores them after the ball and golly thing, they know the punishment Scott come down, and I don't doubt for a minute that Ryan Christie has been 100% honest and truthful in his version of accounts. And again, I think we have to challenge it, and any other players who sort of fall foul of this rule, I think we need to see the evidence that they've done something wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. Now, one last point I'm going to make. You opened up talking about the threat. You've got to look at the threat of your opposition, no matter who it is. And I agree with you. I think the fullbacks are a threat. So my game plan is, from my tactical mind, Stevie, Frimpong and Laxalt attack the two fullbacks from the get-go. And as you said before, we've got the personnel if you need to then go back to a more defensive formation, we've got the personnel there that can do it, and we've got the substitutes, and it's a strong bench. Can I ask you for a prediction? Is it too early in the week to ask you for a prediction? We don't know fully who is going to be available at the moment.
I think if we're going to do this show next Friday night, Paul, I think once we see who's available, because we should have a much clearer picture before the Saturday, you know, who's going to be available, who's all back, no injury, then I think that's the time for predictions.
Now, just to take you up on that, we will be doing a Friday night show.
Yeah.
We'd normally go out at 12:30, but we will be doing a Friday night show. It won't be a phone-in, but I think looking at the analytics that the busiest time that we see is between 6 and 8. So it might be later. It might be later than that, but it certainly will be a nighttime show. And I'm sure everybody will be getting involved the night before the Rangers game.
I think it's one of those things, I certainly know from my own experience, that after everybody's away to bed and you're sitting and you're just thinking about the game the next day, you wish you had like-minded people to talk to about the game.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're in front of you and you can engage through the social media platforms, then I think it should be a real good show, and we'll be able to discuss everything that's going to happen relevant to the following day.
I'm looking forward to it. Now, we've had loads of comments coming in, and thanks everybody for letting us know if there's any technical issues whatsoever, because we want to put out a show that's perfect every time. Doesn't always happen. We drop the ball from time to time, but it's great if you tell us that the mics have dropped out and we're able to get them back up and running. So thanks everybody for joining us. But all that's left for me to say is to Stevie Mullen, thank you again for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Absolute pleasure, Paul. Thank you.